I'm on.
All right.
Okay, we're on.
We're both on. Look at that. All right. Welcome, everybody. We got more people in here than usual. Maybe you've just made a mistake and can't find your class, or maybe you're thinking about giving us a shot because you heard about how much we're doing on Joseph. I'm not sure. We'll just keep it positive and think there's more people in here because they want to be in here.
Right. Yeah, the Joseph story, we started a couple weeks ago at the end of the class and then all last week, and we know we've got another full period here with Joseph. If we finish fine, if we don't finish, that's fine. We'll come close to it, but the Joseph story is so packed. Genesis 37 to 50, and then there's only one chapter in that section that suddenly the writer steps away and talks about something that happened to Judah. But 13 really power-packed chapters on the life of Yosef. His name in Hebrew is Yosef. I used to have a baseball player named Joseph, and I tried to teach him his name in Hebrew, and he just couldn't get it down. I said, it's Yosef. He just couldn't remember that. I said, well, look, you're sliding into third base, and the ump says, Yosef. And he never had any more trouble. He never had any more trouble with that.
So you came up with this title for us, The Rest of the Story. Was that a Paul Harvey accent on that?
I just happened to see it, and so
Okay.
what I did, I said, here we are. We've been, trying to get through this, and so I put The Rest of the Story. So I thought that was really a neat little thing. And those pyramids are in Giza, right outside of Cairo, and so it was a great setting for that. So
I liked it. I just figured people in here and online might have heard Paul Harvey when they
Right.
read the sentence.
yeah, the older people have heard Paul Harvey. The younger people probably have no idea who he is. Okay?
Okay, so where we left off last week, which seems forever ago because I've been all over the place at the Christian Scholars Conference in Houston for 3 days, which was excellent. But I told Cheryl I felt like we lived a week inside 3 days. We left off with Joseph's rise to power after Potiphar has made him second in command. We looked at the signet ring was given to him, and he was awarded the ability to do anything in Egypt, second to only Pharaoh. And so jumping back in at that point, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I place you in authority over all the land of Egypt, and he took his signet ring and handed it to Joseph, so now he can sign the checks for the country. And he clothed him with fine linen clothes and put a gold chain around his neck, signifying that he was someone in authority. And we had some various pictures there of that, artists' renditions of what it might look like. What we've noticed is that Joseph changes quite a lot from one photo to the other. Here, he's got maybe, I don't know if I can say that, but to me, this picture makes it look a little bit more like Native American type look to him. No shirt and the long hair and kind of chiseled look. And then later, he changes a little bit. He goes older, younger. It depends on which picture we're looking at. But he was 30 years old is the point. And so you could draw or have real pictures of multiple people at 30 years old, and they would all look a little bit different. And so we don't know exactly what he looked like, but he looked more and more Egyptian than Hebrew, which is why in just a few minutes his brothers won't recognize him. So he must have changed to not look as much like what he used to look like, not just the age, but also the dress and possibly the appearance.
Yeah, I knew Stanley. He didn't have a beard.
Right.
And so,
But the Egyptians used other things too. They did shave differently. They had makeup. They had several things that they did with the skin that maybe the Hebrews didn't do, and so maybe that separated him some too.
Yeah, and remember, this is 21 years later. This is in the early part of the second year of the famine. Joseph was 30 when he became Pharaoh. When they come down, I mean, now this is 7 years before they, this is like 8 years before they come down. But he will be 39, 38 going on 39 when they see him. So it's been, it's been a while. And people do change. And of course, they think he's long gone. They have no idea that it's Joseph.
And this picture I really liked that you picked because it does show the different facial hair features and possibly eye makeup. And I say that because we're also going to eventually see burial practices of the Egyptians that would have been different from the Hebrews. Right. And Joseph has adopted all of these things because he's embedded in the culture that's there in Egypt. Another possible picture, him riding on a chariot. Chariots were not, they weren't like our cars. Not everybody had those. Not everybody had horses. So he's 30 years old, and he begins serving Pharaoh the king. And Joseph was commissioned by Pharaoh and was in charge of all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of abundance, remember our little cartoon last week of the little scrawny cows eating the fat cows. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced large, bountiful harvests. He also gave him Azareth, daughter of Potiphera, if I'm saying that correctly, Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife. So that's important because we're going to talk here about his sons, and so it's good to know that he got married and got a wife and where she came from, because that's something that sometimes we skip in the story. But why don't you take us through his two sons and their names?
Yeah, the two sons are going to become two tribes. This is not, most of the tribes are sons of Jacob, but two of the tribes will become grandsons. And not only that, these two sons are sons that actually going to have these two tribes are going to be tribes in the north. Actually, be three parts. There's half of the tribe of Manasseh is on the right side of the river, and the other is on the left side. If you look at a map, that is east and west. But what happened, if you remember in the story, was that they liked where they were, and so they talked Joshua into letting them stay on that side. But Joshua said, "Well, you need to go and fight with your brothers and help them out." So they left the wives and children there, and they did go across. And so you say, well, if there's two tribes in Joseph, that makes 13 tribes. However, there's no land for the tribe of Levi. Levi is scattered among all the tribes, and so there's still 12 land spaces there. So anyway, very, very important. And of course, notice the play on words here. Mm-hmm. God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's house. That is, he doesn't mean totally forgotten, but he's now so occupied that he just doesn't have time to try to go home. He's just buried under trying to keep Egypt surviving. And then so he named the second child Ephraim. Certainly God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. And then we follow that with a little chart, a little description of the two words. And so Manasseh actually comes from the verb to forget, and Ephraim comes from the verb, a noun that means, or an adjectival word that means, as you can see, fruitful, fertile, productive. So he makes a play on their names. He names them and then makes a play on their names. And then this is going to be very important for us because notice Manasseh is first, Ephraim is second. But something's going to happen to that arrangement.
Now, all that's going on. Joseph has gotten a wife. He's had children. He's noticing his blessings by God, that he's fruitful in the place that he originally came as a slave, which is, fascinating that his life is basically turned around. He's attributing all that to God. And then the famine shows up, and people from every country come to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe throughout the earth. Now, there's that eretz word here, where sometimes people say earth, sometimes people say land. So we'll look at some different verses on on that. But it's a widespread famine. If it wasn't, then it wouldn't have reached to where his brothers are because they're not in Egypt. So I think it probably is earth more than just a land, but you can tell us what you think here in a second. So when all the land of Egypt experienced this famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. And this is interesting. Pharaoh said to all the people of Egypt, well, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. So Joseph is second in command, and Pharaoh is saying, I'm not going to make this decision. Whatever he tells you, we'll do. And while the famine was over all the land, Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt. And people from every country came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, and the famine was so severe throughout the earth that more and more people were coming from greater distances. But here's my question. What does go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you possibly remind you of? That's why I have it in red. Because Mary says the exact same phrase to Jesus in Canaan when they run out of wine. And we had a great discussion, Dr. Cloud and I did, about, we don't have to get dogmatic about it. We're not saying that you have to see it this way, but what's fascinating here is that Joseph is doing the best Joseph can do, but he's not God, and he's not the Son of God, and even though he's providing for the people, eventually the people don't have any way to pay for what Joseph is handing out, and they end up going into indebtedness because they still need food. And eventually they give up their lands to pay for food, and finally they go into slavery. And Exodus 1 starts with a Pharaoh comes to power that doesn't know Joseph, and now the Hebrews are enslaved. But when Jesus turns the common element of creation, water, into wine, he's announcing that his people, he is the King of Kings, and his people will be liberated. The day for them is coming of joy, not of slavery. And yet the same phrase is used in both. So just a fascinating thing to consider. So when Jacob learned that there was grain in the land in Egypt, he sent his sons, all but Benjamin, there to buy grain. So the famine has reached up to where they are, obviously outside of the immediate area of Egypt. And he sends everybody but Benjamin.
Yeah, and remember, there are only two children of Rachel, and that's Joseph and Benjamin. And so we find out when they start having a conversation about Benjamin that it's either 6 or 7 times in the story. I think I may have mentioned this last week. They say, oh, we can't bring the boy with us. Father with the boy. Remember, 21 years have passed. He's not a boy. And then you will see later on that he brings his 10 sons with him when they come down. This is what I did a little...
simple math.
Yeah.
Compared to math that's coming, this is simple math.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
We got one coming that's going to be much more complicated than this.
He has an MA in math. You know that, right? So...
You don't really need an MA, but it did help. It suddenly hit me, and I said, years ago, I was studying the passage. You'll see the passage that comes for the big bath that's going to happen later on. But anyway, this explains what I just said to you. And we know, because the text tells us it's in the second year of the famine. But now remember what's going to happen. The sons of Jacob are coming down. They're going to go back home, take the food. They're going to use that food up. They're going to argue at home. We need to go back. He said, don't come back without bringing the Nahar. It's actually the same word used when Joseph was made the crown chief. So he has made Benjamin the main person. Is what's happened. So anyway, lo and behold, when you get to chapter 45, and we're jumping ahead just for a second, it will tell us that they're still, after they've come down, gone back home, come down again and brought Benjamin with them. Then Joseph is going to reveal himself, and then they go back home to get Jacob. Now, 2 full years have passed, and that's what it says in Genesis 45, 6 and 11. So there's still 5 years left of the famine.
The simple math is the vision of 7 years of famine, and 7 minus 2 is 5.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure everybody knows that it really was simple.
So as you can see, they come down, and we found a lot of pictures. What we didn't find very much of was cartoons.
No, there's not many cartoons.
Yeah, I just saw one. He saw 3 or 4, but we saw very, very few cartoons. Anyway, he speaks to them harshly.
Harshly.
And again, we don't know what's going on, and we don't know if there's a little bitterness there or what he's doing, but he's intending to teach them a lesson. And so again, we can't read his mind, but anyway, so he calls them spies. And of course, you come to see the land, and so that later you guys can invade the land. Yeah, we know what's happening. You're really not good guys, and blah, blah, blah. And so he has them tell him about his whole family. So finally, after he makes them sweat things out a little bit, he said, here's what we're going to do. You're going back home, but we're going to have one brother that's going to stay here just to make sure. But I know your households are starving. We want you to, get back there and take care of them. And so then you bring your youngest son to me. And they go, ooh, this is not going to work, is what they're thinking. But he keeps Simeon, as we'll see probably.
Yeah, well, the option is they die.
I'm sorry.
The option is they die.
Yeah. Right.
So there's an incentive here to actually make something work.
Right.
So Reuben speaks up.
Yeah, Reuben, this is interesting. You remember Reuben's the one who tried to save him. Back when Joseph went up at 17 years old, went to find his brothers in the north, and they had thrown him in a pit, and Reuben saying to himself, okay, as soon as I get a chance, I'll get him out and get him back home to his father. Now keep in mind, Reuben is in trouble anyway with the family. Reuben has had an affair with one of the concubines, the mother of 2 of the boys. And later on, when Jacob is on his deathbed, he will remind that you lost your place as being the oldest son. You lost your position because of what you did. That'll come up later on.
But they did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. So possibly some even the harsh language could have been the culture, could have been foreigners, could have been the fact that it's going through an interpreter. Lots of different variables here that would have come into play. And he stepped away from them and he began to weep. But then he came back after he composed himself and spoke to them again. And he had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Right. So the brother, the one that's going to remain has been selected.
And I'm sure he treated Simeon very well in the months that followed here, but he didn't want them to see that. So this is what happens. He runs. This happens twice in the story, that he gets touched by. They're talking to each other, and Reuben is arguing for him. And the interesting thing is, Judah becomes the main spokesman, and he hears this conversation, and then he has to slip out and weep because all of this is hitting him really hard. This was tough on him too. Just think about this. And again, we can't read his mind and know what he was thinking, but I think he was just going to teach them a lesson some way or another.
So their hearts sank that night when they stopped to spend the night and found their money in their sack. So they've been spoken to harshly. One of their brothers is being held that they will come back. And now they find out they've basically stolen the food that's been given to them because their money's in the sack. And so they turned to each other trembling and said, what is this that God has done to us? Because they still think they're being punished for what they did to Joseph back at the cistern.
Back 21 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So they still have a guilty conscience over this. And so we did that. We're going to pay for it.
It's interesting they transferred on to God's doing something to them, though.
Right.
So Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, because, of course, he believes that Joseph is dead. And Simeon is now no more, even though Simeon is still fine, but I guess he's making the assumption that this will not end well.
Right.
And now you want to take Benjamin. And you say that Jacob said, absolutely no.
Right. That was my doing in there. But it's very clear in the text. Jacob is saying, no, we're not going to do this. We're just not going to do this. And, of course, they still have some months of food left.
And so the famine was still severe, and Jacob's sons had eaten all the grain that they bought. So here's what happens. We go down there. This whole episode has taken place, but they did sustain their lives by eating what they had brought back, and now they're out. And so Jacob says, we'll go back and buy a little bit more food. So they've got to make another trip. Of course, you would anticipate they would make another trip to get Simeon at some point, but they didn't bring back enough to not need another trip. But Judah replied, the man solemnly warned us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you, speaking about Benjamin.
Yeah, so now Jacob's in between a rock and a hard place. What's he going to do? Are they going to starve to death? Or is he going to take a chance and just accept the fact that Benjamin is gone? So this was very, very traumatic for him.
But he's not the little toddler or
Right.
teenager. He's just the most favored of Jacob at this time.
Right. I think he's in his probably upper 20s. But he could be, 24, 25, but they've been gone. It'll be 22 years when when Joseph reveals himself. And so he was born before Joseph left. And so he may be 25, 26, he may be 28 or 30.
Well, he's got 10 sons,
10
as you
sons.
point there. So,
And they're named. A lot of times when you have a number mentioned, and you look at different manuscripts, sometimes the manuscripts vary because as they copied the numbers, they just made some mistakes. The scribes made mistakes. But anyway, you got 10 sons that are all named. So besides the daughters. So he has a large family.
so then Jacob says to them, before they leave, if it must be so, then do this. Put some of the best products of the land in your packs and carry them down as a gift for the man that has Simeon. And take double the silver with you so that maybe you can pay for what apparently was put back in their bag. So repay for the food we've eaten and then pay for the food that you're getting, and maybe everything will work out. Perhaps it was a mistake. As for me, if I am bereaved, interesting translation you chose, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved.
Yeah. So he's really struggling with this whole idea.
So they hurry down to Joseph. They hurry back down to Egypt to Joseph, and they bow before him. And so here's another picture that someone has artistically put together, what it might have looked like. And the brothers are frightened because when they've been taken into Joseph's palace. Bait could be house or palace or temple, but palace probably fits best, Dr. Cloud says, because of where his position is. He's not going to be in some little hut over on the side or just a regular house. So they're taken to Joseph's palace for a meal, and Simeon is brought and added to them. And when Joseph looked up and saw his full brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, remember from Rachel, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And then he declared, "May God be gracious to you, my son." So Simeon's fine. He sees Benjamin, and then he plays dumb and asks the question of, is this your youngest brother?
Right. And I threw full in there. Hebrew doesn't have a lot of times expressions for things like grandfather, great-grandfather. It does it in such a way that you know by context what's happening. So I'm the one that put full brother there. His own mother's son is what the Hebrew says, that lets you know that these brothers were all many of half brothers. So we found this picture here that
He's a little young to have 10 kids, but it's a nice picture. It's very warming. It makes you feel like there's some good reacquainting going on.
Right, and so he starts showing great hospitality to these brothers of his, and they don't understand any of this. This is, you know, money was in our sacks. Here we are. Simeon is okay. He's brought him back to us, and he's had us come to his palace. They brought him. They brought the brothers, the steward, to the palace to have a meal, and they're going to have a meal together. So this is really very, very shocking to them. Again, after he sees Benjamin, he breaks into tears. I thought this was a great picture.
Yeah, this kind of shows that it's more palace. You can see the columns back there in the back and the open air to the outside, and it's a big place. It's not just some little abode. And then he washed his face and he came back out, and regaining his composure, he said, "Serve the meal." Now we're leading up to the harder math. They were seated before Joseph in order by age, from the firstborn to the youngest. And the men looked at one another in astonishment. Now, why would they have been so astonished that they got sat down in that order? And here's a little more difficult math, as I put on the top of this slide.
Okay. So if you're a math major or an accountant major or somebody that deals with numbers, you'll get the idea. We don't know if they were seated in a circle, that is around a table, or if they were seated in a long line. We don't know that. If they are seated in a long line, the different combinations, let's see if I can make this as simple as I can. Let's suppose that we brought David Cruz up here on the stage. And that would put him over there where that zebra is.
Yeah.
Right. If this is one order, this is one way, right? Now, if David stays over there and Stan and I trade places, you see, that's another way. But then if he moves, anyway, you have 3 people, 3 times 2 times 1. So there's 6 different ways you can see this. If you add another person, if Foy came up and sat on the other side where that plan is over there, Foy, that'd be 4 people. And the number of arrangements are 4 times 3 times 2.
24.
Oh, 24. If we brought up somebody else, it'd be 5. Now,
20 times 3, 60 times 2, 120.
120 different arrangements, and you've only used 5 of the boys.
Don't go again. I'm going to have a calculator if we go any higher.
Multiply by 6, multiply by 7, multiply that by 8, 9, 10. If you got a calculator, it'll show you if it's 10 factorial, it's I think it was almost 4 million chances, 4 million ways to seat them. I know it's impossible. Well, I think you could easily see that when you get to 6 times, it jumped to 720 ways to seat them. Mm-hmm. And then multiply that by 7, and it just quickly explodes on you. Well, if they're in a circle or some way or another connected to each other, then it's 10 factorial, which is a big number. What'd you get for? I saw 4.
3,628,800. Now, you've just taken me back to Coach Hale's high school math class, because you also have to bring in the 10 factorial and then the probability of how many you choose out of it. And so it gets even more complicated, and that's why they're so astonished, is they were like, this guy doesn't know us from anybody, and he put us all in the exact proper order from oldest to youngest.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, the Hebrew says they were astonished because, I mean, they didn't realize.
He knows who they are.
Yeah, and they didn't realize this is 10 factorial either.
Probably not. Their calculators were these crazy things with slides and birds and things.
Yeah, that's right. Slide rule and all that kind of stuff,
right.
you know. And we're trying to count that. But anyway, it was even obvious to them. There's no way you could know this. How could you possibly know? Put us in order. And again, you know, you can't always do that by looks. If you got, you know, even children in stair step, sometimes one is smaller than one and is older, somebody else. But this is, again, this is a long time before, and they're all grown now, and the youngest one is in his 20s, Benjamin. So this was a shock to them.
That would have to render you almost speechless,
No, that was it.
like afraid.
Oh,
It would
yeah.
have to render them almost speechless or afraid of, if this guy can do this, then we need to mind our P's and Q's, because there's no telling what else he can do.
Right, so they just get one surprise after another surprise after another surprise.
So they set him down. This artist rendering here has him at a big banquet table and sitting linearly and in a line. And then when the portions were served to them from Joseph's table, well, Benjamin got 5 times as much as everybody else.
Right. Yeah, and again, this had to be everything that kept happening had to be a little shocking. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is that happening?
Just before the family heads back home, back up to Jacob, Joseph instructed his steward to put his own personal cup in Benjamin's belongings.
Yeah.
And they had not gone far from the city when Joseph told his steward, "Pursue the men at once, and when you overtake them, ask, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Is this not the very cup my master drinks from? What have you done? What you have done is wicked.'" So he's accusing them of stealing from him, which they already think they've done before because their money was back in the bag. But this cup has special significance, and so when the person pursuing them pulls it out, now if they haven't been scared before now, they definitely are now.
Yeah, and this great picture, he even shows a silver cup, and that's what the text says. It was his silver drinking cup. And so, it's really kind of amazing what is on the internet.
Well,
And you have to know your stuff.
it's also amazing that this has not fallen too far out of sync with current times, because people go to hotels and they steal the towels. So it's kind of the first time that someone goes to these people are well-to-do, they won't miss this silver cup. It's something that was much more serious than that because it was significant in the times of meaning. But some people might read this and kind of think, well, he's probably got another silver cup, who cares? But it's not that. It's the meaning behind the cup. It's his personal cup that he drinks from. So it's like stealing directly from the king or the right-hand man to the king.
Yeah, you just had a big banquet for them, and now you take his cup.
Souvenir, yeah. So Judah pleads for Benjamin.
Notice it's Judah again. Judah becomes the main spokesman. And so again, even though these come from different places, you do see that, and so Joseph or Pharaoh, somebody will look a little different. It's still got the idea. So the pictures still were very helpful. And, here's this comic strip, and this is basically saying exactly what we've just said. And so, but anyway, Judah said, "Look, let me stay and be the slave. Please don't make Benjamin." No. Benjamin's the one who took the cup. He's the one that's going to stay. And so Judah makes a very passionate plea for him. And this had to move Joseph, that he said, "I'll take his place. Let me take." This is not the attitude he saw 22 years ago.
And because he's basically saying that if Benjamin stays, their father's going to die.
Yeah, if Benjamin stays, we don't come back with Benjamin, our father will just die. He'll just pass away.
Which is what he says here. The lad's brother is dead, but ironically, he's saying that to the man he thinks is dead. He is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him.
And I use lad because, again, we don't have time to work the crown cheek or anything like that, so I just use the word lad. In all the versions I looked at, only the Syriac version, the Peshitta, had prince for the word Nahor. Everybody else had young man, lad, boy. They don't know exactly what to do with it because a lot of liberal translators would just not care. They think the story is made up anyway. But so I just use the word lad because to them he was still the youngest son, and you could look at it that way if you wanted to.
So just more pleading that if the lad's not with them, the father will die, so let one of them stay instead. Of course, he doesn't allow that. So then Joseph could no longer control himself before all of his attendants, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Now, I put "I am Joseph, is my father still alive?" because this is the only opportunity we had for a Donna cartoon, and she's probably online today since she's not here. She was online last week, and she emailed me about it. This is the cartoon for Donna. It would be the equivalent of when Darth Vader told Luke that he was his father. They're like, "What? You're our brother? And is your father still alive? Who's our father?" And I'm sure that there was this deer in the headlights, dumbfounded look, because he doesn't look like them, might not sound like them, but I don't even know that they've processed yet, Dr. Cloud. Whoa, now we know how he set us in line to eat dinner. They're too busy probably freaking out that he's actually standing in front of them and that he's alive, and the fact that if he is as mad at them as they think he has the right to be, woe is it to them for what he might decide to do.
Yeah, and that comes up later on after the death of Jacob.
So he says, "I'm your brother, the one you sold into Egypt," just in case they were confused on which brother he is. "And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves that you sold me into this place, because it was to save lives that God sent me before you." The text there actually says, "You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. For the famine has covered the land these 2 years, and there will be 5 more years without plowing or harvesting." So it's not over yet. It's still bad, and it's going to continue to be bad. But now that he's revealing to them who he is, they've suffered through 2 years of the famine. Over the next 5, they're going to be abundantly blessed because he still loves them.
Right, right.
So different pictures, different drawings of him trying to explain to them, "I'm your brother," with all the Egyptianness he has and all the Hebrewness they have. They finally accept that information and realize that that's true, probably with some intimidation and trepidation, though. "So now return quickly to my father," that would be Jacob, "and tell him that this is what your son Joseph says. Come down to me without delay, and I will provide for you." I don't know how "because" ended up there by itself. Sorry about that. "Because then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and Benjamin wept as they embraced, and Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept over them, and afterward his brothers talked with him." So there's some healing going on. It may not be immediate, or it may not be completely holistic, but it's going on.
It's a shock. And every once in a while you go through that life. I remember the first time I rode across the Sea of Galilee, it was just almost like I was in a trance. It hadn't been that way on the trip. It was good on the trip in a lot of places, and it was very exciting, but I just went into a trance, like I was in another world. I love this picture here. And so,
yeah, they look much older here, more probably accurate to their ages based on the text, and they're having a moment of just family. One guy's been over, kind of can't believe it or crying, and then others are in amazement. I mean, it's a great capture of all the emotions that were probably going on with that revelation.
and again, you can see he lived in a palace. That actually is very true reflection.
Yeah. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, interesting, now we get the king coming back into the picture. "Tell your brothers, do as follows. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and then bring your father and your families and return to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt." So here was another pause, and this might be all we have time in the last couple minutes to talk about. So, I said earlier there was that do whatever he tells you, and Mary said do whatever he tells you about Jesus. And so here I have, is this another possible connection to Jesus here? What I mean is the Son of God comes down amongst all of the mess, which could be easily equated to a famine, right? A famine of faith, a famine of godliness, whatever you want to say. And Jesus, being obedient, comes down and then returns to the Father. And Revelation tells us in Revelation 21, 1 through 4, that eventually the dwelling place of God is with humans, and he comes back to be with us. Now, this is kind of where the comparison has to end, because the rest of this story, wouldn't be the same. God the Father is not going to die like eventually Jacob will. But my point is here, look if you reread that and think about the Father telling the Son that when he comes back up to heaven, he will return with the Son and come back to where they are. And that's exactly what the end of the biblical story tells us will happen, because we've been reconciled to the Father, just like Joseph and the brothers have been all reconciled in the family.
Right. Do I have a minute?
You do.
Okay.
You have two, actually.
Okay. So we'll pick up and finish that next week, summarize it, and then we'll go into our next topic. You heard Leslie's announcement. We do need one. We've got everything pretty well in shape for the camp. We do need a person on Tuesday morning from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. to a retired nurse, doctor, anybody, pharmacist, somebody that works with. And we have somebody that'll step in, but that person's working all day Monday, and I hated them to have to come back Tuesday, but he will if we need to. But we're in good shape there. Next Sunday, Father's Day is when the camp starts. Second thing is the brochures are supposed to be here early next week for the trip to Israel, so I'm sorry about the delay on that, but hopefully that will happen. And then 2 weeks from today, I've been asked by the elders to preach. So I'll be preaching 2 weeks from today here, and then to class afterward. So anyway, when we have a passage that's coming up. I'll just save that passage. So it says, when Joseph saw the wagons. And so I have a whole sermon on that. I'm not going to preach on that, but it was a sermon on belief. When Joseph said, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Jacob, I don't believe it. And then it said, when he saw the wagons, he believed.
Yeah, awesome.
So,
well, I'll close us with prayer if that's good with you.
That's good.
All right. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the contemplation of these stories and the connections that we see by the benefit of the time that we live in after the cross, and several things are maybe even more meaningful to us than they were to some of the original readers because of the time you've blessed us with and the knowledge that we have living in the world that Jesus changed through the cross. We thank you for the abundance that you promise us. We thank you for the healing and the restoration of a relationship to you through Jesus. And we look forward to when you send him back and you come to dwell among us and you give us all of the benefits and the blessings and the richness of the land, not just the promised land in the midst of this creation, but the new heavens and new earth that will be as everything should be, and everything live in harmony, and everything live in worship to you. And we look forward to that, and may we go out and keep that before us as we walk and talk and go to all those you send us to in the world and its brokenness that it is now. May we be agents of the future in the present as much as possible. We pray all this in the name of Christ. Amen. Have a blessed day.